The Toronto Maple Leafs have come back to take a 2-1 lead in their series against the Tampa Bay Lightning. David Morassutti is here of Locked On Leafs to talk about this series and what it'll take for Toronto to pull off the win. All that and more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe at your podcatcher of choice and on YouTube so you can get new episodes as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Leafs, David Morassutti. And David, a little bit of a shaky start there, but the Leafs seem to have found their groove. I got to ask you, are you surprised they rebounded so well after that very difficult game one?
I'm not surprised at all, just because of the way that they lost that first game. You know, a brutal start to the game, obviously first 10 minutes and you're already down 2-0, 3-0 after the first period. And, you know, this team, it just, you know, they got a little bit too caught up in the moment. And you know what? You feel like that was just something that they had to get out of their system. And it might have been a good thing to get it out of their system now rather than later in the playoffs. So, yeah, it was obviously you want to win every game possible. But, you know, the turnaround from game 1 to 2 was certainly a great thing for this Leafs team, because they needed to show some pushback. They needed to show some fight, and they got all that in game 2. But yeah, game 1 wasn't a great start, but the response has been even better.
And, you know, you talk about pushback and fight. I mean, you know, this team is into this game when Auston Matthews drops the gloves with Steven Stamkos.
Yeah, that's the first time we've ever seen 260 goal scorers fight ever. And I thought that was a neat and interesting stat. But Auston Matthews is not one to drop the gloves. He says he's gotten into like little scuffles at practice, but he has never dropped the gloves really in his life. So it's one, you know what, like, it's good to see that he's willing to stand up for himself. That's a good thing. You don't want to see Auston Matthews drop the gloves. Those hands are pretty valuable for the Leafs. And, you know, you also have to be a little bit careful, because Tampa is going to goat the Leafs into doing these things. They're going to try to get them to retaliate. And in that situation, Auston Matthews really didn't have much of a choice, because Stamkos is grabbing him and he's punching him. Like, you gotta respond somehow. But also at the same time, the Leafs were in a position there where they should have been getting a penalty, maybe even 2 penalties going to, for them in that situation. So you got to really be careful, because Tampa knows they play a lot of situational. They have they're very aware of the situation. So the Leafs have to be a little bit more careful in those circumstances. But you do like the fact that Auston Matthews is one to take it to that level if he has to. You don't want to see it very often. But yeah, this game, the game 3 really did have everything.
What was the turning point for this team? You know, game 1, as we said, was not pretty. But game 2, they came out and rallied and you know, ended up evening up the series. What turned things around for the Leafs?
In game 2, it was really the best players were the best players, right? John Tavares never had a hat trick before in the playoffs. He gets a hat trick against Tampa. When your best players are having performances like that, you're most likely going to come out on the positive end of a lot of those games, right? And so I think that was the big one there. And the big change, really, in my opinion, has been taking Ryan O'Reilly and putting him at the third line center. He started game 1 as a second line center. And what that really does, it takes away the ability to match Tampa 1 through 4, top from line 1 to line 4. When you put Ryan O'Reilly at that third line center, it makes Tampa realize now we have another line that we have to account for. In the past, especially in past years in the playoffs, the Leafs have been very guilty of being very top heavy, and the bottom 6 has been kind of it's been neglected a little bit. Now that's not the case for this team. They can roll 4 lines. Obviously the fourth line is still your traditional fourth line, but top 3 lines, you'll take those 3 lines against any team in the league. And I think that's a huge boost. That's what that Ryan O'Reilly trade was meant to do. And I think Tampa has struggled a little bit to realize that they don't necessarily have the depth that the Leafs have. And when the Leafs decide to spread things out, it makes it that much harder to defend them.
You talk about Ryan O'Reilly in game 3, he ties the game with 1 minute left in regulation and then sets up Morgan Reilly for the game winner with 45 seconds roughly left in overtime. I mean, how big a contribution is that?
Yeah, like those are games the Leafs lose far too often, where the Leafs just don't. In game 3, the Leafs were not good. They were not very good. If they had lost that game, it would have been a deserved loss. But this is the Stanley Cup playoffs. It doesn't matter what you do the entire game. If you can get those moments to go your way, that last minute, Ryan O'Reilly in the right spot, right in front of the net, getting that puck and making most of the chance in front of the net there. Yeah, so I think the big one there is Ryan O'Reilly was in the right spot at the right time, getting it right in front of the net and, finding a way to get that puck through. It doesn't have to look pretty. And that's something the Leafs have been very guilty of, is trying to make things look too pretty. Just make the easy, simple play, and he did that on that play. And then on the game-winning goal, something the Leafs had struggled to do in Game 3, which was win a face-off and win it cleanly and get traffic in front of Andrei Vasilevsky. He had no idea where that shot was coming from. That, like, Morgan Reilly doesn't usually score a lot of goals, but when he gets it through and when you get traffic in front, it makes it very tough. And, that's a game the Leafs usually don't win. Even when they get it to overtime, a lot of people are, very anxious because, the Leafs don't usually come up in those moments. So I think for the Leafs, for the team, it was a big self-belief moment there, knowing that they can come through in those moments.
One other thing that the Leafs are not known for in recent years is goaltending. Talk to me about Ilya Samsonov and what he's meant to the team so far through 3 games.
Yeah, first game wasn't his best. He looked nervous. He looked shaky. Game 2, he was pretty good. He didn't need to be very good. Tampa wasn't exactly coming out lights out in that one. But game 3, like we were talking about it on the podcast, and Mike said, like, one of these games, Ilya Samsonov is going to have to steal it for them because you got Andrei Vasilevsky, the best goaltender in the world, on the other side. If he's not going to have his best game, or even if he's going to have a decent game, your goaltender is going to have to steal you one when your team isn't playing well. And that's what Ilya Samsonov did in game 3. If Ilya Samsonov doesn't play like he did after the first period, because the first period it wasn't his best, but after that, he was the reason why they were able to win that game. That Leafs team really did struggle with the pressure that Tampa was putting on them. Extra chances, leaving guys open in prime scoring locations. Samsonov had to win that game for them, and he did.
All right, so what's the key? Game 4 going to be huge. Big difference between going back to Toronto 2-2 and being up 3-1. What does Toronto have to do to keep going and build on this 2-1 lead?
They got to use the same recipe for game 2 and 3, which was get off to a good start and try to get that first goal. They score the first goal in the last 2 games, and it leads to wins. You have to knock Tampa off their game. Tampa is going to do something to try to make Toronto, act differently, right? Whether it's a little bit of that extra physicality, ignore that stuff. Ignore the extracurricular stuff. Stick to your game, and I think that's something the Leafs really need to focus on. And Tampa's going to have relentless pressure. The Leafs have to simplify things a little bit more, spend less time in their own end, and take advantage of the matchups that Tampa's just not that deep right now. The Leafs are the deeper team, and it's been proven in this series. They need to continue to take advantage of that, and they should be able to end this earlier. Game, like if you can come back to Toronto with the chance to win it and take the pressure off, that's the big one. Don't let Tampa get any momentum. Take the pressure off yourself. Give yourself a little bit of that breathing room, and make game 5 the one that you can clinch the series.
All right, David, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter, _Morassutti, and you can get the Locked On Leafs podcast wherever you get your podcast from. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Locked On Leafs. And yeah, we'll be getting a new episode up on Monday morning. So be sure to look at that and get a little bit more of an insight into what to expect going into Game 4.
All right, David, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theater near you, with killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee. You could stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you have. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you with 110% of the difference. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.